What would convince me to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses? This is the JW Review. Hello everyone, welcome to the JW Review. My name is Mike Felker, and what I'm trying is something new, and that is to try to put out a weekly topical video of some kind. I'm normally doing weekly Watchtower reviews, but there's just so much. I've actually got a long list of topics that I really want to get into, stuff that's just been lingering, and just not have the time. So this week I want to do a topical video on what would convince me to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, the reason I'm bringing this question up is because I've been asked this question many times, because it may look like a very tall order, because it seems like that nothing the Watchtower can say could possibly be right. You think that maybe I'm just overly critical of the Watchtower, and it would be pointless for you to try to sit down and convince me, because, man, if I disagree with like nearly every single Watchtower doctrine, then that's just going to take forever, and is that really worth your time? For example, you've got to convince me that the name Jehovah is in the Christian scriptures, right? Because I don't believe the name Jehovah is there, so you'd have to convince me of that. You'd have to convince me that Jesus is not only a created angel, but he's also Michael the archangel. So you'd have to convince me of that. You'd have to convince me that Jesus is not my mediator. So that's a pretty tall order right there. You'd have to convince me that there's two classes of Christians, one that would rule in heaven forever, but I would be confined to the paradise earth. And of course, with that, I can't be born again, and I can't partake of the bread and the wine. So many things from that. You'd have to convince me of that whole system. You'd have to convince me of 1914. You'd have to convince me that I can't partake of a blood transfusion. Of course, you'd have to convince me that I have to believe everything that the Watchtower puts in print. So much to go through. And it would just take years of just trying to convince me, and then realizing that you can't even convince me of one single doctrine. So why even bother with someone like me? And why even bother with these apostates that have left the organization and they're atheists now? So you've got to convince them of that, and you've got to convince them of every single little thing. And so the reason I even thought of this idea for this video was because I watched a very interesting. It wasn't really a debate. You could call it more of a discussion. It was between on the John Cedars channel with Lloyd and a Jehovah's Witness, which is a rare opportunity. To get a Jehovah's Witness to come on camera on the internet for everyone to see. Rare opportunity. I know how rare that is. But what was really interesting about that video, and I'll try to, if I can remember, I'll try to link that video below here in the description, so you can watch it for yourself. Now, as far as I know, Lloyd is an atheist. I think that's how he describes himself. And by the way, Lloyd, if you're watching my videos, I do enjoy your content. I watch nearly all of your videos. I'm not an atheist myself, but I respect you. I love a lot of what you do put out. You have very high quality material. And if you're watching this, someone else is watching this, my whole audience, check out the John Cedars channel. But believe me, I don't agree with everything that Lloyd says, but he has some really great insights. He does a lot of interesting research. But of course, I'm not an atheist, and so I disagree with a lot of what Lloyd says on that stuff. But back to the point, that video was interesting because Lloyd was very persistent, and rightfully so, because the Jehovah's Witness was there to convince Lloyd, or try to convince him, that this is God's organization, that the Jehovah's Witnesses is God's organization, and he can prove that. So that got me thinking, okay, because what Lloyd kept on doing was this Jehovah's Witnesses was trying to take things down different rabbit trails, and he just couldn't really keep things on topic. And in fact, I really started to feel sorry for this guy, because he just was, I don't know if he was nervous or what it was. He was walking into the lion's den, let's just put it that way. But he just couldn't really keep things honed in on topic. He really couldn't. And so what Lloyd was trying to do, and rightfully so, was say, hey man, just convince me that this is Jehovah's organization, right? That's what you came here to do. So it got me thinking, a Jehovah's Witness could sit down and they could try to go through every single doctrine and try to convince me of that. But really there's one thing that you just need to really lock in and convince me of. And everything else could fall into place, and it would be much, much easier to get me to believe everything else. And what is that one thing? That is 1919. Because what happened in 1919, according to the Watchtower? Well, what happened in 1919 is that Jesus and Jehovah approved the Watchtower. They approved the governing body and appointed them as the faithful and discreet slave. Now, there was no formal governing body at the time, and maybe that's another issue. But nonetheless, Jehovah and Jesus appointed the Jehovah's Witness leadership. Let's put it that way. They are the faithful and discreet slave, and that appointment happened. That approval happened in 1919, and that organization had escaped Babylonian captivity, and they are now Jehovah's approved organization. So think about it this way. If that really, really happened, if that truly happened, regardless of how many errors they've made, no matter how many false predictions, no matter how many children the Watchtower has allowed to go to be abused and not be handled by the law, and those abusers to be brought justice, right? No, all of that stuff. If Jesus and Jehovah really approves this organization, then I need to stop what I'm doing, and I need to go worship God in that organization, even if I don't yet come to agreement with all the doctrines. What would be happening in my mind? And I'm really trying to be honest with myself here, and you should be honest with yourself too. There would be a lot of cognitive dissonance happening in my mind, because I would say, okay, wow, the Jehovah's Witness has taken me to the scriptures, and they have shown me without a shadow of a doubt that Jesus and Jehovah chose this organization to be God's faithful and discreet slave. That really happened, and I can't find any other way to read the scriptures. That is the best explanation of what the scriptures teach. If that really happened in my mind, then I would have some serious cognitive dissonance that I've got to deal with, because I've got all these other doctrines that somehow I've become convinced of. Because if Jesus and Jehovah chose this organization in light of what they hold to be true, then Jehovah and Jesus must be right. I have some stuff to seriously figure out. And while I'm figuring that out, I need to be with this organization. Now, it might happen that the organization is going to have a difficult time dealing with someone like me, because I've got to let all these doctrines fall into place, and I've really got to find a way to agree with these doctrines somehow. And so it might be hard to deal with me. And in fact, I might even get disfellowshipped because I'm having a hard time dealing with some of these doctrines, and I'm causing some disunity, not because I'm trying to cause a ruckus or whatever, but because I'm trying to figure things out in my mind. And so for all I know, I could get disfellowshipped, but in being disfellowshipped, I still believe that this is God's organization chosen in 1919 by Jehovah and Jesus. And so even in a disfellowship state, I would try to figure all this stuff out, and I would still believe that this is God's organization. It's kind of like a guy like Robert King, who disagrees with some of the major doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses, like 1914 and things like that. But he still believes that the Jehovah's Witnesses are God's people. At least the last I checked, he still believes that. But he's not in the organization. He's kind of outside the organization, but he still believes in the core doctrines. So I can imagine me being in a state similar to that, right? Still believe this is God's organization, but I'm outside of the organization for various reasons. And so I can imagine a scenario like that happening. But think about it. If you've convinced me of 1919, then everything else should eventually fall into place. And that's what I would strive to do. I would strive to get this cognitive dissonance worked out. So if you're a Jehovah's Witness and you've been frustrated about how you would convince Mike Felker to become one of them, I've given you an opportunity. If you can convince me of 1919, then you've really accomplished something. Let me put it that way. And that's why I've actually debated with a Jehovah's Witness on 1919. If you go to my website, michaeljfelker.com, you can click on the tab. I think it says debates, and you can read that entire debate between me and a Jehovah's Witness on the topic of 1919. And the reason I did that is because that is a foundational doctrine for the Jehovah's Witnesses, because if you prove that doctrine wrong, the organization basically crumbles. But if you prove it right, then I should become one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So that is a tall order. I will be totally honest with you, because nothing is more frail than the 1919 doctrine from a scriptural perspective, a completely frail, unbiblical doctrine. So it is a tall order. I will give you that. It's a very tall order, but I've helped you to narrow something down. Narrow something down to where you could just start with that, prove it right to me, and we're off to the races. So if you want to do that, if you want the opportunity to prove 1919 to me, let me know. I will open my mind as much as possible. I will listen to you. I will go to the scriptures with you and allow you to prove that doctrine to me from the scriptures. But I'm not holding my breath, because you probably know, if you're honest with yourself as a Jehovah's Witness, you know that you can't prove that doctrine biblically. You really can't. You really can't. Which is why when Jehovah's Witnesses came to my door last, I asked them, can you prove 1919 to me? They couldn't even start. They barely even knew about the doctrine. But that should be one of your primary things to prove. Because again, everything should fall into place if you prove that doctrine right. So, if you have any comments about this, if you have any agreements, disagreements, or other perspectives on this, I would love to hear from you. What would it take for you to become one of Jehovah's Witnesses? Would it take believing in 1919? I'd love to hear from you. So if you like this video, please subscribe to this channel. Please like this video, of course. If you click like, the word gets out. You can also click the notification icon. That way you're notified when I come out with new videos. You can also go to michaeljfelker.com and you can subscribe to this via podcast. That way you don't have to watch this. If you don't like watching the things, you can just listen to this while you're doing your dishes, mowing your lawn, or whatever you might be doing. I try to provide all the different avenues for the word to get out. So I hope you enjoyed this topical video. If you have any ideas for future topical videos, please do let me know. So that's all I have for today, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. For more information about Jehovah's Witnesses and other topics, please visit michaeljfelker.com. There you can also reach me directly to submit questions or comments to be covered on the JW Review. To subscribe to this podcast, please go to iTunes and search for the JW Review.